So you've bought yourself a spindle moulder and you've never had one before, you've never used one before, and you're not really sure how and what to do with them. So stick around and I'll explain to you a lot of the ins and outs and the what to's and the what not to's of using a spindle moulder. So essentially these things are the best machine in a joiner's workshop. They're the most versatile and they certainly do the most work out of any other machine that you'll have in the place. They can be exceptionally dangerous if they're used wrong, so that's why we want to work them right. At all times, or as often as you possibly can, if you've got a feed unit, you want to have it on it and working all the time. That just minimises your chance of having an accident by a huge degree. If you don't have a feed unit though, a good alternative is just to make a simple spring. You probably have ones that go in here that come with the machine that are a metal spring that are a hold down. If you don't have something like that, you just make a simple spring and you cramp it onto your fences, you cramp it onto your table to hold your timber in against the fences, to hold your timber down against the table. Not only does this make it safer, but it also improves the quality of your job, because as you're pushing through, you've got a constant pressure on it. One of the things that causes some inconsistency in your job, especially when you're doing freehand, is the stop-start, because you get a bit of this happening in your mould, or you can get a bit of burn from staying stationary for too long. But a spring, just a simple timber spring, anybody can make that. Very easy, it makes the machine a lot safer to use as well, because you're keeping your hands right away from it. Now, as far as setting the machine up goes, you want to do your best to have as many circular heads as you possibly can have. This one in here, if you can see, it's just a rabbiting block. It's a circular head. Runs throwaway knives or turnover knives, whatever you want to call them. Now, the beauty of a circular head is if for whatever unlucky reason you happen to slip and you throw your hands in, a circular head is going to bite you, but it's going to bounce your hands away. It's not going to drag you in. It's still going to do significant damage, but it's not going to drag you in and chop furthermore out of you. A little bit further on, I'll give you a demonstration of the 3 different concepts of heads that you can have, and I'll explain a little bit as to what they can do if things go wrong for you on that one. But in setting the machine up, they're a pretty simple machine. There's not a lot to them. So in setting them up, we have lots of packing spacing collars here. So I don't know how your modern machines work, because I don't have modern machines. Like my newest spindle moulder is still over 50 years old. So we have lots of packing collars here. We always have our nut literally finishing right at the top of the shaft. This is just to protect the machine. It protects the thread of the nut and it protects the thread of the shaft. But when you're setting your fences, you want to try and have your fence as close to the edge of the cutter so that you've only got a small clearance, like maybe 1/4 of an inch at the most, between the edge of your cutter going through and the lead in of your fence. This does 2 things. It gives you a far superior cut, but it also protects you a bit too, because the chips coming out of it can't be as big. If you've got your fences set back further, you're going to have bigger chips coming out, which could potentially hit you and do a little bit of damage. Not a massive amount, but I mean, cop it in the eye, it'll do a lot of damage. The other thing with the tail out fence is just the same thing, as close as you possibly can. As I said, they're a pretty simple machine really, and the overwhelming importance when it comes to safety is keeping your mind on the job. As I've mentioned before in some of the other videos I've done on machinery, when I did the saw operation, I've used these things some days for 8 hours straight. Just nothing else but just poking timber through the machine. Now, as I said in my saw video, it is mind-numbingly boring. but you have to learn, you've got to train your brain to concentrate on what you're doing. Not only to avoid stuffing up what you're doing, but the easiest and most common ways that people have accidents is because they nod off in concentration for just a momentary amount of time. Like, it doesn't have to be long. It can be 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and bang, you have an accident just because you've lost focus. Now, it's one of the most important things that I can stress to you is stay focused, all right? They're a great machine, but they can do you a lot of harm if you're not paying attention. General operation with them, if you're using freehand, as I said before, you want to use the springs. If you can't use your springs, you want to operate in a way that your hands cannot possibly go into the cutters. So when you're holding pieces of material, right, you want to have your hand spread over the edge so that you've got a portion of it on the back side and a portion of it on the face. So if you slip, all you can do is slip along the timber. You can't slip, like if you've got your hands on the top, right, you can slip in. The other problem with having your hands on the top, see my fingers getting close to the edge there? You would be surprised the amount of people that have taken a tip off a finger because they didn't realize where their fingers were. And you think, how could you possibly do that? Very, very easily. As I just said before, operating the thing 8 hours a day, very, very easily. Momentary lapse in concentration, bang, finger gone. So always make it a habit. Don't use the machine without thinking about it. Make it a habit so that when you come up to the machine, the first thing that you do when you use it freehand is you've got your hand positioned in a way that you cannot slide into the cutters. It becomes muscle memory, it becomes second nature. It's how you use the machine. One of the most important things to remember. I'll touch on it a little bit more a bit further on into the video, but the other thing is don't try and use the machine for what it isn't designed to do. A spindle moulder is a very versatile machine, but it will not do every single thing. And if you're getting things custom made, as I mentioned a bit further on, I give an example of a video that I saw. This is where things get dangerous. If you've got guards with your machine, like this machine came with a guard that comes down and over the top. We never use them because they get in the way. It's a guard, but it gets in the way, and for the overwhelming majority of the time it's used with a feed unit anyway, so it renders that guard not applicable. But if you've got a spindle that has a decent guard on it and you can operate the machine with the guard on it, leave the guard on, don't take it off. Just keep in mind all the time, keep it simple, keep it safe, use your common sense, right? If you're thinking this feels a bit dangerous, it probably is. Stop doing it and rethink what you're doing. One other thing I'd like to stress, if you are a hobbyist woodworker, you're not a professional woodworker, but you enjoy woodworking and you're thinking about getting one or you've got one, and this applies to any machine, okay? Think about getting some lessons from a professional woodworker. Like any employees that we have here that are just starting out their journey, in Australia we have a 4-year apprenticeship, so a person comes in to their 4-year apprenticeship, day one they don't know anything, so they've got 4 years of training before they become qualified. So in our workshop here, in that first year, they don't touch any of the machines in here. They do a bit of tailing out and things like that, but they don't touch the machines. They get taught how to use everything over the course of 4 years, right? And then even once they become a tradesman, they're still learning how to use the machines properly. But the general safety aspects of the machine get taught to them straight up, which is you're always and only thinking about what you're doing. You're not thinking about the beach, you're not thinking about your girlfriend, you're thinking about what you're doing, and that gets drummed into them. But I cannot stress to you enough, if you know anybody that is qualified, or if you know of anybody that does lessons, do yourself a huge favour, get some lessons. Because this is a trade. and these machines are operated by qualified tradesmen. And too many people who enjoy woodwork as a passion and a hobby end up doing huge damage to their hands and their fingers because they never got any tuition on how to use the machine properly, how to set the machine up properly, what's safe, what isn't, what's dangerous and what isn't, you know, what I can do on this machine and what I shouldn't do on this machine. At the end of the day, you want to preserve these things, you know. So consider it. Well worth your time and effort to look into it. The next ones that I use a lot of are these, which is what we call slotted collars. So they have that name simply because of the, if I can get out of focus, because of the slots in those collars. The cutters go inside the slots. So how we operate these is, when you're setting these up, obviously your pair of cutters need to be identical in their height. They can't even be a bee's wing smaller than one another, because you'll get out of balance here and they'll just fly out. But when we're setting these up, you want to have them so that they don't come out. Like if you've got them set like that, you're in danger of throwing a knife. You want to have them back at least, you know, as close as you can to the back of the shaft, preferably even further back. So the more pressure that you've got on these, the better. So you can see there's a cutout there. Some of them have pins in them. I don't know if you can see in there or not. The pins have been removed on these particular ones. I've only ever had one pair come flying out of the machine, and that was about 20 years ago when we first moved into this factory. One of my employees mixed up a pair of cutters that were basically identical, but one was just ever so slightly smaller in height than the other, so it was the wrong pair put together, and I didn't know because they looked pretty much the same. And when I set them up and turned the machine on, the cutter come flying out. But thankfully for me, I had the feed unit set up in place, so the cutter came out and just slammed into the feed unit and did no harm. So all was fine. A lot of people are scared of these. There's nothing to be frightened of if you do it correctly. Like, as you know, I use my rule to measure so that they're exactly the same distance out on either side, and pinch them down nice and firm, and they're fine. They do a good job and they're perfectly safe. The next one can be a very dangerous head, and I would never recommend, if you know of these heads or you have any of these heads, never ever use these heads without a feed unit on, because these the head itself is not dangerous as such, but if you happen to slip and you go into the cutters, these will drag you in, and that's a square head. These are very old nowadays and probably outlawed in a lot of countries, but never ever use them without a feed unit. They're perfectly safe with a feed unit and they do a good job. They're noisy because they're square. They do a good job and they're perfectly safe if you use a feed unit. Never use them without a feed unit. Have your table inserts in to the point where it's as close as possible to the cutter head that you got in there. Like, you don't want a big wide gap between your cutter head and the edge of the table. So this particular machine has two inserts. So I've got a wider, I'm not sure if you can see, a wider insert there, which is always in the table. It never comes out. And then I have a smaller insert which goes in. So that insert, which goes in when I have a smaller head or a smaller set of cutters in there and I want to close the gap up. So for this cutter head, we want it in there. And I'll fix that up later. Same with the back fence, you want it as close as possible as well. Your feed unit, you want your feed unit set up as often as possible. The main thing with spindle moulders is you really want to minimise how much you're having to do freehand with them. Not because freehand's dangerous in any sense, but you've got less opportunity to hurt yourself if you've got the feed unit set up. In saying that, I have to do a lot of freehand stuff here in general, but 90+% of my work would be done with the feed unit, because the overwhelming majority of things I can use the feed unit for, and I will always use the feed unit because not only is it safer, but it also does a better job because you've got a constant flow. You don't have a stop-start scenario which can get marks in your timber as you're machining. So in terms of general use, like you've probably seen some footage on YouTube of people doing some pretty scary things on a spindle. Like I saw a video, I think it was a short, a month or so back, of a fella tenoning rails on like door rails on a spindle moulder with these big cutters like this on the spindle. No guards or anything on the machine. I'm assuming it was in one of the Asian type countries where laws are a lot more relaxed. But he was on I can't remember whether the spindle moulder had a sliding table or whether he had some kind of sliding mechanism. But what he was doing there was exceptionally dangerous, and he's probably done it 1,000 times and probably never had any problems. However, if he does have a problem, it's going to be huge because there's no protection on the machine at all, and what he's doing is not what this machine is designed to do. Yes, you can do it, but that doesn't mean that that's what the machine's designed to do. A bit of common sense and some safety consciousness comes into play with these different things. Like, the spindle moulder is the most capable machine that you'll have in the workshop, but you don't go ridiculous with things on them. As soon as you start pushing a machine to try and do things that it was never meant to really be doing, that's when you're going to start having troubles. Keep it simple, keep it safe. Operate tooling on it that is specifically designed for spindle moulders. Don't buy tooling that should be on a different machine, or don't get things custom made that aren't supposed to be on them, like what this fellow was doing. Like, that would have been custom made for that machine, no doubt, but far out. Like, it wouldn't take much to lose your whole hand on that sort of scenario that he was doing. Pretty scary operation. But keep it simple, keep it safe. Keep your feed unit in place as often as you possibly can. Set your cutters up right, set your fences up right, and you'll never have a problem. Okay, I hope that helps you. If I haven't addressed anything that you want to know about, please put so in the comments, because it's very hard to come up with stuff to try and say on these things, because I use them all day every day. So I'm not a novice using them, so it's hard for me to think what you might want to know. So please, if there's anything that you want to know, please put it in the comments. I will most definitely respond to you, and I'll answer whatever questions is, to the best of my ability that I can. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.